Hi, Mom. It's David. Listen, Susan and I were talking, and we really need to discuss you selling the land. The voice came through the old black receiver I held to my ear. It was the morning after my 75th birthday. The phone hadn't rung once the day before. Not for a happy birthday, not for a quick hello. Just silence. Now this. I looked around my kitchen. The morning sun slanted through the window over the sink, catching dust motes dancing in the air. The refrigerator hummed its steady, low tune. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, a quiet, heavy stillness. All that land, the 50 acres Robert and I had poured our lives into, was just a business deal to them, a problem to be solved. Mum, are you there? David's voice was impatient. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the birthday card I had bought for myself at the grocery store. It had a picture of a kitten on it. I'd set it up on the mantelpiece, right where Robert's picture stood. It looked lonely. My hand trembled just a little as I placed the heavy receiver back in its cradle. The click it made was loud in the quiet kitchen. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the old oak tree stood strong, its branches reaching for the sky. Robert and I planted it from a sapling the year David was born. Its leaves were just starting to turn gold at the edges. My eyes drifted to the small stack of mail on the counter. On top was the envelope from the county, the property tax bill. It seemed bigger every year, a heavy weight that settled in my bones. My Social Security check barely covered the basics as it was. Just then, my little flip phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. A new message. It was from Susan, my daughter. The screen glowed with her words. David said he called you. It's for the best, Mom. Not a question. A statement. Like she was telling me the weather. I put on my old gardening boots and walked the property line. The air was crisp, with the first hint of autumn, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. Every step was a memory. Here was where Robert taught the kids to ride their bikes. There was the creek where they searched for tadpoles every spring. I ran my hand along the rough bark of a hickory tree, feeling the deep grooves he and I had watched form over 50 years. In the back 40, I saw the fence was down again. A whole section of wire lay flat against the ground. The deer used that path to get to the creek. I made a mental note to call someone to fix it, then remembered how tight money was. In the distance, I heard the rumble of a tractor. My neighbour, Mr. Henderson, was already out working his fields. He saw me and raised a hand in a slow, friendly wave. I waved back. He was a good man. His wife always sent over a slice of her apple pie after she baked. It was moments like that, with good people, that made the loneliness a little easier to bear. But as I turned back toward my empty house, a deep, cold dread began to seep in. The mailman's truck rattled down my long driveway later that afternoon. I walked out to the metal box at the end of the road. Inside, among the usual bills and junk mail, was a thick, glossy brochure. My heart sank. The front of it showed an aerial photograph of my property, my house, my barn, my woods, my creek. Printed over it in big, fancy letters were the words, "Future Site of Oak Creek Estates." Below that, a slogan, "Luxury Living Naturally." They had pictures of smiling families playing on lawns that weren't theirs yet. They were selling my life before I was even done living it. I flipped it over. They were offering an obscene amount of money. Enough to make a person's head spin, enough to solve every problem my children ever had. Tucked inside the brochure was a formal letter, printed on heavy cream-coloured paper. It was addressed to me, Eleanor Griffin. But when I unfolded it, my breath caught in my throat. In the top corner, under my name and address, was another line. See, Mr. David Griffin. They had copied my own son on their offer to buy my home. I unplugged the landline. I turned my little cell phone off and put it in a drawer. The buzzing had been constant, like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. I needed quiet. I needed to think. I pulled out the old photo albums, the ones with the sticky plastic pages. There was David, age 6, covered in mud from the creek. There was Susan, age 10, proudly holding up a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked in the meadow. Their whole childhood was in these pictures, and it all happened right here, on this land. A bitterness rose in my throat. How could they forget? A deep sense of betrayal settled over me, heavy as a wool blanket on a summer night. They had been planning this, talking to developers, sharing my address, all behind my back. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. The whistle of the boiling water was a sharp, lonely sound. I made a cup of Earl Grey tea, the steam warming my face, and sat at the table. I spread the developer's letter out in front of me and just stared at it, my mind a complete and utter blank. My phone rang later that afternoon. It was Susan, my daughter. Her voice was thick and sweet, like honey poured over something bitter. "Mum, how are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine, Susan. Just doing some dusting." I could hear the hum of my old refrigerator in the quiet kitchen. "Oh, you shouldn't have to do all that," she cooed. "That big old house must be so much work. David and I were just saying a lovely luxury condo would be so much easier for you. We saw one that had a pool." She paused, then added, "Especially with your forgetfulness lately. It would be one less thing to worry about." The jab was so quick, so smooth I almost missed it. My forgetfulness. I hadn't forgotten a thing. I remembered the doctor's appointment I drove her to last Tuesday. I remembered the name of her husband's boss, which she had forgotten. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice flat. Then I hung up the phone. The next day was Wednesday, which meant my church group. I put on my good slacks and drove into town. The air in the church basement smelled of coffee and lemon pound cake. It was a comfort. My friend Carol sat next to me, her knitting needles clicking softly. "My Tom is a good boy," she said, looking at her yarn. "He came over last week and helped me set up a living trust. Said it protects things, makes sure my wishes are followed." "A trust," I repeated, the word feeling heavy and important on my tongue. "Yes," she said, "so no one can make decisions for you." The word stayed with me the whole drive home. Trust. As I pulled into my long driveway, a familiar blue sedan drove slowly past my house. It was David's car. He saw me. I saw him. He didn't slow down. He didn't stop. He just kept going. It felt like he was watching me. The phone was ringing as I walked in the door. I knew it was David. His tone wasn't sweet like his sister's. It was impatient, sharp. "Mum, did you think about the offer?" he asked. "No, hello." "I'm still thinking," I said, setting my purse on the counter. "Well, you can't think forever. The developer's offer has an expiration date," he snapped. "You don't understand the kind of financial pressure I'm under. Susan's struggling too. The kids need things." He took a breath, his voice rising. "We just want what's best for you. This is the only way we can make sure you're taken care of. We could finally get you into that place by the highway." He stopped short. The silence on the line was cold and loud. He had said too much. "What place by the highway, David?" I asked softly. "Nothing, Mum. I misspoke. Just think about the offer." He hung up before I could say another word. I sat down at my little desk by the window. I opened my laptop, the one my grandson had set up for me years ago. My fingers trembled as I typed nursing home and the name of the highway David had mentioned. The website that came up was bleak. The pictures were grainy. It was a state-funded facility with a 2-star rating. I read reviews that mentioned staff shortages and the smell of bleach. This was their plan. Not a luxury condo with a pool, a place to put me. The cold dread that had been sitting in my chest for days began to burn. It turned into a slow, hot anger. They didn't just want the money from the land. They wanted me out of their way. They wanted me put away where I wouldn't be a problem or a burden. I looked out the window at Robert's oak tree. For the first time, I understood I was completely and utterly alone in this. I stayed at that desk for hours. As the sun went down, I didn't turn on a lamp. I pulled open the bottom drawer. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I took out my file of financial paperwork. There it was, my whole life in numbers, my monthly Social Security check, the small pension Robert left me, the property tax bill, which was always a struggle. I spread the papers out on the polished wood of the desk. I am house rich and cash poor. The words formed in my mind, clear as a bell. That was their power over me. They thought my lack of cash made me weak. They thought it made me dependent. They saw the big house and the 50 acres not as my home, but as their solution. I looked at the numbers, at the life Robert and I had built, and a new thought pushed everything else aside. They will not win. The town library was my escape. It always smelled the same, like old paper and lemon polish. The air conditioner hummed a steady, peaceful tune. I sat at a public computer, the kind with a sticky keyboard, and typed "How to Protect Your Land" into the search bar. My fingers felt clumsy on the keys. I read about things I'd never heard of, like land trusts and conservation easements. It was a whole other world. Then I saw a little article from our local paper, buried on page 6. It was about a small animal sanctuary called Paws and Wings. The article said they were struggling, about to lose their lease on the little patch of land they rented. A picture showed a tired-looking woman holding a 3-legged dog. A memory washed over me, clear as a church bell on Sunday morning. Robert, my Robert, sitting on the back porch, tossing bread crusts to a family of raccoons. He always said this land was as much theirs as it was ours. A little seed of an idea, small and quiet, planted itself in my heart. The next day, I went to the grocery store. I walked right past the canned peas and the cereal aisle and went to the electronics section. I bought one of those prepaid cell phones, the kind teenagers use in movies. It felt strange in my hand, light and cheap. I paid for it with cash I'd tucked away for a rainy day. It felt like the sky was about to open up. I drove to the park and sat on a bench, the plastic of the phone feeling slick in my sweaty palm. My friend from church, Martha, had given me the name of a lawyer. "She's a real bulldog," Martha had whispered over lukewarm coffee. I punched in the numbers for Ms. Albright's office. A crisp voice answered. "I need to make an appointment about my estate," I said, my own voice sounding thin. We set a time for the following week. Before we hung up, Ms. Albright said something that sent a chill right through me. "Just be prepared, Mrs. Griffin," she said. "Families can become vicious when inheritance is on the line." A few days later, a letter came that had nothing to do with my children. It was from the Homeowners Association, printed on thick, important-feeling paper. It was a complaint. The paint on my front shutters was peeling. They gave me 14 days to fix it or face a fine. The old me would have panicked. My hands would have shaken. I would have called David to ask him what to do. But I wasn't the old me anymore. I sat down at my kitchen table, the morning sun warming my back, and took out a sheet of my good stationery. I wrote a polite, firm letter back. I quoted the bylaws, which allowed for a 30-day extension due to weather. I requested that extension. I signed my name, Eleanor Griffin, in my best cursive. As I sealed the envelope, a thought came to me, clear and sharp. They had forgotten that a mother's love is a gift, not a debt they can call in. I felt a little flicker of my old self, the woman who ran a household and raised 2 children, returning like a pilot light. That afternoon, I got in my car and just drove. I found the road that led to the Paws and Wings sanctuary without even looking for it. The sign was faded, the fence a little crooked. It was small and looked tired, just like the article said. I pulled over across the street, under the shade of a big maple tree. I could see a few horses in a dusty paddock and hear the faint sound of dogs barking. A woman came out of a small barn, pushing a wheelbarrow. She had her hair tied up in a scarf, and her face was smudged with dirt. She looked exhausted, but she stopped to pat one of the horses, her movements gentle and sure. I felt a strange kinship with her. We were 2 women, fighting our own quiet battles on our own patches of land. She was fighting for her animals, and I was just beginning to realize I had to fight for mine. When Susan called to say she was just in the area, my heart did a little flip-flop. I knew she wasn't just in the area. People weren't just in the area out here. I spent the next hour gathering the papers Ms. Albright had asked for. The deed to the land, Robert's will, my bank statements. I found the deed in the old metal box in our closet. I ran my fingers over Robert's signature. He had insisted the deed be in my name alone. "Just in case, Ellie," he'd said with a wink, "so no one can ever push you around." I thanked him, right there in the quiet of my bedroom. I put all the documents in a big manila folder and tucked it under the cushions of Robert's armchair, just as Susan's car crunched up the gravel driveway. I made us iced tea. We sat in the living room, making small talk about the weather. But I saw her eyes, darting around the room, scanning the surfaces. Her gaze landed on the stack of mail on my little desk, right where the HOA letter had been. She was looking for something. I had my meeting with Ms. Albright the next Tuesday. Her office was in a small brick building downtown, the kind with a real wooden door that chimed when you opened it. It smelled of old books and furniture polish. She wasn't a flashy woman. She wore a simple grey suit and had kind, intelligent eyes behind her glasses. She laid out the process for donating the property, her voice calm and steady. "This is called a deed of gift with a retained life estate, Eleanor," she explained, pointing to a line on a document. "It means the property belongs to the trust, but you have the legal right to live in your home until you pass. It's ironclad. It's legal. And once it's signed and filed, it is irreversible." She leaned forward, her hands folded on the big oak desk. The only sound was the hum of a small fan in the corner. "You must be 100% certain. There is no going back." I looked out her window at the clouds drifting by. I thought of David's voice on the phone, Susan's sickly sweet suggestions. I thought of the nursing home by the highway. I met Ms. Albright's gaze and felt a stillness settle over me. "My children," I said, my voice clear and strong, "gave me the certainty I need." I started making small trips in the early morning before the sun was fully up. I'd buy a big bag of dog food at the grocery store, or gather up Robert's old flannel blankets from the cedar chest. The air was always cool and damp, and my headlights cut through the morning mist on the back roads. I'd drive to the Paws and Wings sanctuary and park down the street. I never saw anyone. I would carry the bags to the front gate, my heart beating a little fast, like a teenager up to no good. I'd leave the food and blankets right by the rusty mailbox and be gone before the first birds started their morning songs. It was a strange feeling, I was helping, but it was a secret. This quiet purpose felt like a warm coat I could wrap around myself. It was mine alone, a little flame I was tending in the dark while I waited for the right time to light the whole fire. The right time came sooner than I expected. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. It was David. He didn't bother with hello. "Mum, I'm emailing you the papers from the developer. You need to sign them and send them back. Today." His voice was tight, impatient. The air conditioner in my living room clicked on with a low hum. I looked at the photo of Robert on the mantel. I took a slow breath. "No," I said. It was just one word, but it felt as heavy as a stone. There was a complete silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing it, like a machine that had been given a command it didn't understand. Then his voice came back, loud and ugly. He started yelling about his finances, about my responsibility, about how I was being selfish. I didn't yell back. I just gently placed the receiver back in its cradle. The sudden quiet in the house was a blessing. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a text message. I picked it up and read the words on the little screen. "If you won't be reasonable, we'll have to explore other options to protect your interests." I knew what that meant. The words were couched in fake concern, but the threat was as clear as a church bell on a Sunday morning. Protect your interests. They were going to try to have me declared incompetent. The old woman who was too forgetful to manage her own affairs. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath my feet. My hand trembled as I dialed Ms. Albright's number. I told her what David's text said. She wasn't surprised. "It's a common and ugly tactic, Eleanor," she said, her voice a calm anchor in my sea of panic. "They'll try to get a judge to grant them power of attorney, but we can get ahead of it." "How?" I whispered, clutching the phone. "I want you to schedule a full medical and psychiatric evaluation with your doctor. Immediately. We need a professional, documented baseline of your health and mental state, on the record, before they make a move." The thought of it, of being poked and prodded and questioned like a child, was terrifying. But I heard myself agree. The next morning, I was in my bedroom, looking for my Medicare card in the old roll-top desk. My fingers fumbled through a stack of old envelopes and receipts. Tucked in the very back of a drawer, I found a thin blue envelope with my name on it, written in Robert's familiar, slanted handwriting. He had written it just before his last surgery, the one he never woke up from. I had forgotten all about it. With shaking hands, I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. The note was short. "Eleanor," it said, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad for too long. And never let them bully you over the land. It's your heart's home. Do with it what makes you happy. All my love, Robert." Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the worn paper. They weren't tears of grief, not really. They were tears of relief. It was his blessing. It was the permission I didn't even know I was waiting for. I went through the medical evaluation. It was a cold, bright Tuesday morning. The paper on the examination table crinkled under me, and the doctor, a young woman with a kind but serious face, asked me questions. She asked about my memory, my medications, my moods. I felt like a bug under a microscope. It was humiliating to have to prove I was still myself, but it was necessary. The doctor declared me perfectly sound of mind and body for a woman of 75. "You're in better shape than most people 20 years younger, Mrs. Griffin," she said, smiling as she signed the report. The paper felt heavy in my hands, like a shield. I drove straight to a copy shop and then to the post office. I sent the original report to Ms. Albright with a note to file it with my other legal documents. It was one more brick in the wall I was building, and I knew it was a wall I was going to need. The next day, I called the owner of the sanctuary. My hand trembled a little as I dialed the number I'd found online. A tired voice answered, "Paws and wings, this is Sarah." "Hello," I said, my own voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Eleanor Griffin. I'm a local resident and an animal lover, and I was wondering if I could have a tour of your facility." We met that afternoon. The place was small and a little run down, just like I'd seen from the road, but the air smelled of clean hay, not sadness. Sarah was a woman in her 40s, with lines of worry around her eyes, but a fire inside them. We walked the grounds, and she showed me a three-legged dog named Gus and an old horse with a gentle gaze. I saw the love in her eyes and the desperation. I knew I was making the right choice. Before I left, I turned to her by the gate. "Sarah?" I said. "I know a potential benefactor who might be interested in your work. Would you be able to provide me with your financial records?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope chasing away some of the exhaustion. The day came. I sat in Ms. Albright's office, the air smelling of old paper and furniture polish. The deed of gift was on the heavy oak desk between us. It was a thick stack of papers, full of words I barely understood. But I understood the last page. My name, Eleanor Griffin, and a blank line next to it. "Are you 100% certain, Eleanor?" Ms. Albright asked, her voice gentle. "Once you sign this, it is irreversible." I looked out her window at the clouds drifting by. I thought of David's voice on the phone, Susan's sickly sweet tone, and the nursing home by the highway. I thought of Robert and the oak tree. "My children gave me the certainty I need," I said. I picked up the heavy black pen, and with a steady hand, I signed my name. The only condition was that I had the right to live in my house for the rest of my life. A wave of profound peace washed over me. The deed was done. The sanctuary's board of directors moved quickly. That was part of my request. A week later, a truck pulled up my long driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as two men dug a deep hole right by the main road. They mixed cement. They lifted a large professional sign into place. The afternoon sun glinted off the fresh green paint. It read, "Future home of the Griffin Family Wildlife Preserve." My family name. But not for them. My phone, which had been quiet for days, suddenly rang. I looked at the screen. It was David. I took a deep breath and answered. I didn't even have time to say hello. His voice was a distorted scream, so loud it hurt my ear. "What have you done?" I let David yell. I held the phone an inch from my ear and listened to him sputter and rage. I heard words like inheritance, betrayal, and senile. I just sat in Robert's old armchair, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in my quiet kitchen. When he finally ran out of breath, pausing to gasp for air, I brought the phone back to my mouth. "It was my land to do with as I wished," I said, my voice calm and even. "Please direct any further questions to my lawyer." Then I pressed the red button and ended the call. A minute later, the phone rang again. It was Susan. Her name flashed on the screen, and I could already imagine the tears, the accusations. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. They showed up that evening, just as the sun was setting. The sound of their car tires crunching too fast on my gravel driveway was like an alarm bell. I was in Robert's old armchair, holding a warm cup of chamomile tea. I didn't get up. I watched them through the little peephole in the front door. David's face was red and blotchy. Susan looked like she'd been crying for hours. They didn't look like my children. They looked like strangers who wanted something from me. They started banging on the door. Not a knock, but a hard, angry pounding that shook the wood. "Mom, open this door right now!" David shouted. His voice was muffled, but the fury came through clear as day. I took a sip of my tea. The steam warmed my face. I could hear Susan start to sob, her voice thin and high. "Please, Mum, just talk to us." I just sat there. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked its steady rhythm. Tick, tock. The pounding went on for a few more minutes, then stopped. I heard them arguing with each other in harsh whispers. Finally, the car doors slammed shut and the engine roared. They drove away. The silence they left behind was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The next morning, my lawyer, Ms. Albright, called me. "Eleanor, good morning," she said, her voice calm and professional. "I've received a letter from an attorney representing David and Susan Griffin." I gripped the phone cord a little tighter. It was a thick, coiled thing, cool to the touch. "And what does it say?" "The usual things," she said, and I could almost hear her shrugging. "It's full of accusations. Undue influence from the sanctuary. Diminished capacity on your part. They are claiming you were not of sound mind." A cold knot formed in my stomach. That old fear. "What do we do?" "We do very little," Ms. Albright said firmly. "I have already sent a reply. It contained 2 items, a certified copy of the medical evaluation you just had, and a copy of your late husband's letter." There was a small pause. "That should quiet them down for a while." I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down at the kitchen table. I was staring at the salt and pepper shakers, shaped like little chickens, when the phone rang again, just as I hung up with Ms. Albright. I almost didn't answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Is this Eleanor Griffin?" a cheerful young woman's voice asked. "My name is Brenda, from the Oak Creek Ledger. We'd like to do a story on your extraordinary donation." The story ran on the front page of the local section 2 days later. I went out to the end of the driveway in my robe to get the paper, the morning air crisp and smelling of damp earth. The headline was big and bold. "Widow honors late husband's memory. Saves animal sanctuary with historic land gift." They used a nice picture of me from a church potluck a few years back. I looked happy. I looked solid. Not at all like a woman with diminished capacity. My phone started ringing around 9 o'clock. It didn't stop all day. But this time the sound was different. It wasn't the demanding buzz of my children. It was the cheerful ring of friends. "Eleanor, it's Carol. I just saw the paper. I'm so proud of you." "Mrs. Griffin? This is Jim from the hardware store. Just wanted to say that was a fine thing you did." Each call was like a small stitch, mending a tear I didn't know was so large. People saw me. They saw what I did, and they understood. By lunchtime, I felt like I was floating. I hadn't felt this light in 20 years. Late in the afternoon, there was a gentle knock on the door. Not a pounding, just a polite rap, rap, rap. When I opened it, Sarah from the sanctuary was standing there. Sarah was holding a big, messy bouquet of wildflowers, purple asters and yellow goldenrod, all tied together with a piece of twine. Her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "I brought you these," she said, her voice a little thick. "They're from the back meadow." "They're lovely," I said, taking them from her. "Come in, I'll put them in water." I was just about to make some coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the flowers in a big glass vase between us. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air. For a long time, she just looked at me. "You have no idea what you've done for us, Eleanor," she finally said. "For these animals. You've given us a future." I looked down at my hands, folded on the tabletop. You gave me one too. And for the first time, I told someone the whole story. I told her about my birthday, the phone call, the developer's letter, the place by the highway. I told her everything. She listened without saying a word, her expression shifting from sympathy to a quiet, righteous anger on my behalf. When I finished, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was rough and calloused from hard work, but it was wonderfully warm. The family calls started that evening. First it was my cousin Martha, David's godmother. Her voice was sharp as broken glass. Eleanor, I am ashamed. To do that to your own blood, your own children who love you. Martha, I said, my voice perfectly level. Thank you for your call. And I gently hung up the phone. An hour later, my nephew called. He was a good boy, but he was scared of his Uncle David. He mumbled something about family sticking together and how I was tearing everyone apart. I listened, said, I understand your position, and hung up. But then, late at night, the phone rang again. It was Robert's sister, Mary, who lived 3 states away. Her voice was just a whisper. Ellie? She said, using my old nickname. I got a call from Susan. She told me what you did. There was a pause. I held my breath. I just have one thing to say. What's that, Mary? Good for you, she whispered fiercely. They had it coming for years. I smiled. The truth, I realized, has a way of finding the light, even if it has to whisper. The developer officially withdrew their offer the following Tuesday. I didn't get a letter or a call. I just noticed it when I went to get the mail. The big, ugly signs that had popped up along my road, the ones with the developer's logo and a grinning real estate agent, were gone. The holes they left in the grass looked like tiny healing wounds. A few days later, I was washing my breakfast dishes when I heard the rumble of a heavy truck coming up the driveway. For a second, my heart seized up, the old fear returning. But when I looked through the kitchen window, I saw the logo painted on the door. It was a paw print inside a heart. It was the sanctuary's truck. 2 men got out with measuring tapes and wooden stakes. They were here to survey for the new fencing. They waved at me through the window, and I waved back, my hand steady. I watched them walk toward the back meadow, their voices carrying on the morning air. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. It felt like the land was finally safe, but I knew my children wouldn't give up so easily. Susan showed up alone a week later. She didn't call first. She just appeared on my porch, her face pale and puffy from crying. She wore an expensive coat, but it looked rumpled, like she'd slept in it. Mom, she said, her voice cracking. Please, can I come in? I held the screen door open but didn't move aside. I just looked at her. My daughter, a woman of 50, looking like a lost little girl. What do you want, Susan? I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes again. We were wrong. David was under so much pressure. Please, Mom, you have to try and reverse it. There must be a way. We're ruined. I thought of the nursing home by the highway. I thought of my birthday, silent and empty. I looked at my daughter, who saw my land as a pile of cash and my life as an inconvenience. A strange calm settled over me. Your choices are your own, Susan, I said, my voice quiet but firm. As are mine. I closed the main door, leaving her standing on the porch. The lock clicked into place with a soft, final sound. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel a single shred of guilt. My new life began the next morning. A group of volunteers from the sanctuary came by with ladders and buckets of paint. They were going to paint the shutters, the ones the HOA had complained about. There were two college kids and a retired man named George who told terrible jokes. The air filled with the clean, sharp smell of fresh paint and the sound of their cheerful chatter. Sarah, the sanctuary owner, brought over a big thermos of coffee and a box of donuts. We all sat on the porch steps for a break. "We can't thank you enough, Ellie," Sarah said, handing me a mug. No one had called me Ellie since Robert died. It was his name for me. Hearing it felt like finding a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. The sound of their happy work was a better medicine than any doctor could prescribe. I started a new routine. Every morning, I'd walk the property with Sarah. She'd bring a clipboard, and I'd bring my memories. "The ground gets marshy down by the creek in the spring," I told her one day, pointing with my walking stick. "That's where the wild irises grow. Robert always said we should leave that part alone for the frogs." "Okay, no enclosures there then," she said, making a note. "What about this ridge?" "That's where the deer make their beds for the night," I said. "They like to be up high, where they can see everything." My knowledge of the land, of its creeks and meadows and hidden corners, was suddenly a valuable asset. I wasn't just an old woman in a big house anymore. I had a purpose. I was helping to build a home, a true and final one, for creatures who had nowhere else to go. The letter arrived in a stiff, cream-coloured envelope. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of. My hands trembled just a little as I slit it open with one of Robert's old letter openers. The words were cold and sharp. They were officially contesting the donation. They were taking me to court. My breath caught in my chest. All the peace I'd felt vanished, replaced by a cold dread. They were really going to do it. They were going to try and prove I was an unstable old woman in front of a judge. I picked up the phone and called Ms. Albright. I read the whole letter to her, my voice shaking. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said calmly, "Eleanor, don't you worry. They have no case. It's a scare tactic, designed to frighten you into giving them what they want." I wanted to believe her. I took a deep breath, looking out at the volunteers staking a new fence line. I had to believe her. The first new residents arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was in my kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes, when I saw the sanctuary's truck pull up to the back meadow. It moved slowly, carefully. I dried my hands on my apron and watched from the window. They opened the back of the truck. After a moment, a doe stepped out, then another. Finally, a whole small herd of deer, maybe 5 or 6 of them, stood blinking in the morning sun. They had been displaced by the new highway extension project. They looked thin and nervous. I watched, holding my breath, as they took their first steps onto the land. They moved toward the creek, their hooves making no sound on the soft earth. It felt like the land itself was breathing a sigh of relief. It was a sanctuary again, the way Robert and I had always meant for it to be. I made a cup of tea and sat at the window for over an hour. The deer drank from the creek and then began to graze peacefully in the meadow. It was the land's true purpose. I knew, in that quiet moment, that my war was already won, no matter what happened next. To keep my mind busy, I started volunteering in the sanctuary's little office. It was a small, cluttered room in a trailer, smelling of old paper, coffee, and faintly of hay. Sarah was trying to manage the donations and the bills all by herself. She looked exhausted. "Ellie, I'm no good with numbers," she confessed one afternoon, pushing a shoebox full of receipts toward me. "Can you make any sense of this?" I put on my reading glasses and smiled. Let's see what we have here. My old skills as a bookkeeper, dusty from years of disuse, came back to me. I spent the day sorting, calculating, and entering everything into a neat ledger. The clatter of the adding machine was a comforting sound. I was useful. I was part of a team. Sarah would bring me a cup of tea, and we'd talk about the animals. The volunteers, young kids mostly, started calling me Ellie and asking my advice. I had a place to be every morning. For the first time since Robert died, I had a chosen family. The official letter arrived by certified mail. My hands trembled a little as I signed for it. It was from a law firm, informing me that a hearing was set. My children were formally contesting the donation. I had to give a deposition. The room was cold and quiet, with just the low hum of the air conditioning. I sat on one side of a long, polished table with Miss Albright. David and Susan sat on the other side with a man in an expensive suit. My children would not look at me. They stared at their hands, at the water pitcher, at anything but their mother's face. Their lawyer started asking questions. His voice was smooth and oily. "Mrs. Griffin, isn't it true you've felt overwhelmed since your husband's passing?" "I've felt grief," I said, my voice steady. "There's a difference." "And isn't it also true," he went on, "that your memory isn't what it used to be? That you've had episodes of confusion?" I looked straight at him. "I remember every promise my husband and I made about this land. My memory is perfectly clear on what matters." He smiled a thin, unpleasant smile and pulled a folder from his briefcase. He slid a stack of papers across the table. "These are your private medical records from the last 5 years, Mrs. Griffin. Shall we go through them?" Ms. Albright put a calm hand on my arm. She let their lawyer read a few notes from my old doctor, things about high blood pressure and a bout of sadness after Robert's passing. He tried to make it sound like I was frail and confused. David shifted in his chair, a flicker of shame on his face. Susan just stared at the table. When he was finished, Ms. Albright cleared her throat. "Thank you, counselor," she said, her voice crisp. "That was very thorough." She opened her own briefcase and took out a single, thin folder. "Since you're so concerned with my client's health," she said, "you'll be pleased to see the results of a full medical and psychiatric evaluation conducted 2 months ago at my request." She passed the report to the judge, who was overseeing the deposition. The room was silent as he read. The opposing lawyer's argument just crumbled into dust. The judge put the report down and looked over his glasses at me, and for the first time, I saw something like respect in his eyes. He turned to my children's lawyer. "I see no grounds here. This case is dismissed." The sanctuary held its first public fundraiser on a sunny Saturday in October. Hundreds of people came. Cars were parked all along the driveway and out into the front pasture. The air smelled of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass. The sound of children laughing filled the air. I saw Mr. Henderson, my neighbour, making his way through the crowd. He came over and took my hand in his big, rough one. "You did a good thing here, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of warmth. "A real good thing." Later, Sarah stood on a small makeshift stage to thank everyone for coming. She talked about the future, about the new veterinary clinic they could now build. "And none of it," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "would be possible without the vision and generosity of one woman, the founder of the Griffin Family Wildlife Preserve." She looked right at me and started to clap. The whole crowd turned, and suddenly everyone was on their feet, applauding. The sound washed over me, a wave of kindness and community. I was home. Sarah showed me how to use the sanctuary's little laptop. My fingers felt clumsy on the keys, but I learned. I started their social media page. At first, it was just a few pictures of the new fences going up, or a blurry photo of a fox I saw at dawn. Then Sarah took a beautiful picture of a rescued owl, its big yellow eyes staring right at the camera. I posted it. People loved it. Little hearts and thumbs-up icons flooded the screen. I started sharing the stories of the animals. I wrote about the old horse with arthritic knees and the three-legged coyote who was learning to trust people again. I connected with a whole world of strangers. They left kind comments, not about me, but about the animals. "You're a natural at this, Ellie," Sarah said, peering over my shoulder at the screen. The hum of the old computer filled the small office. "I'm just telling the truth," I said. "People like to hear about good things." I found myself checking the page every morning with my coffee. It felt like opening a window and letting the sunshine in. A few weeks later, a call came into the sanctuary office. It was from the principal of the local elementary school. She had seen our page online and wanted to know if she could bring the first grade class for a field trip. I saw Sarah's eyes light up. We had never done anything like it before. The day they came, the air smelled of cut grass and school bus exhaust. I led a group of children with bright backpacks down to the creek, the same one my own children had played in. Their little voices were like wind chimes. "Look, a frog!" one little boy shouted, his face full of wonder. I helped a little girl with pigtails find a smooth, flat stone for skipping. Her small hand felt warm in mine. Their laughter filled the meadow, a sound I hadn't realized the land was missing. It was a better sound than I ever could have imagined for this place. That evening, after the quiet returned, I sat down at the computer. A little red notification popped up. It was a friend request from a name I hadn't seen in years. My eldest grandson, Michael. My heart did a little flip. I stared at his picture, a grown man of 30, with his father's eyes, but a softer smile. I hesitated for a long moment, my finger hovering over the button. Then I clicked, accept. A minute later, a message appeared. "Grandma, it's Michael. I'm so sorry. I heard what Mum and Dad did. I've been wanting to call." There was a pause as he typed more. "I just want you to know, I think what you did was amazing." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the screen. It was a crack of light in the thick wall I had built around my heart. I took a shaky breath and typed back a simple reply. "Thank you, Michael. The door is always open for you." The next Saturday, Sarah and I worked on a special project. We had a simple stone bench delivered and placed it under the big oak tree Robert and I had planted as newlyweds. The air was cool, and the ground was soft under my knees as I helped clear the weeds around its base. Sarah polished a small brass plaque before she fixed it to the bench. It read, "Robert Griffin. He loved this land and all its creatures." "He would have loved this, Sarah," I said, my voice thick. "He does, Ellie," she answered softly. We sat on the bench together for a long while, not speaking, just watching the leaves rustle in the breeze. It felt right. It felt like I had finally brought Robert's memory home, settling it into the land he cherished. I felt a quiet sense of completion, as if I had finally closed a book that had been left open for far too long. The following Tuesday, I was at the grocery store. I was in the canned goods aisle, trying to decide between cream of mushroom and cream of chicken for the church potluck casserole. The wheels of my cart squeaked on the polished floor. "Eleanor Griffin, I can't believe you'd show your face in this town." The voice was sharp. It was Martha Gable, a woman who used to play bridge with my daughter. I turned slowly. "Hello, Martha." Her face was pinched with disapproval. "What you did to David and Susan, it's a disgrace. They're your own blood. To be so selfish, so cruel at your age." I looked at her, then down at my cart, full of vegetables and soup cans. I thought of the volunteers I was cooking for, of the happy sounds of the children by the creek. A calm settled over me. I looked right into her eyes. Blood is not an excuse for cruelty, I said, my voice even and clear. Then I turned my cart and walked away, the squeaking wheels the only sound, as I left her standing alone in the aisle. The sanctuary got a call one Tuesday morning about a box of puppies left on the side of a country road. Sarah went herself to pick them up. They were tiny, shivering things, all ribs and ears. We set them up in a warm pen with soft blankets and a heat lamp. Most of them huddled together, but one little scruffy mutt, the runt of the litter, kept wiggling through the gate. He'd trot right over to me and climb into my lap. I'd pick him up and put him back with his brothers and sisters. 5 minutes later, there he'd be again, a warm little lump against my leg. Sarah came over, wiping her hands on her jeans and smiling. "Looks like he's chosen you, Ellie," she said. That evening, I went home with a puppy carrier on the passenger seat. The little guy didn't make a peep the whole way. I named him Bobby, after his granddad. My grandson, James, visited that Saturday. He came alone, without telling his parents. He's a good man, 30 years old now, with his father's eyes, but a much kinder smile. He brought me a bouquet of daisies from the farmer's market. He must have remembered they were my favorite. We sat on the front porch swing, the chains creaking softly. Bobby slept at my feet. "I just wanted to see you, Grandma," he said, looking out at the meadow, "and to say, I'm sorry. For everything." "It's not your fault, honey," I told him. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his job, about the girl he was dating. He asked about my work at the sanctuary. It was the first real conversation we'd had in a decade. It felt like finding a lost piece of myself. The following week, I had an appointment with Ms. Albright. The air in her office smelled like old books and lemon polish. I felt calm as I sat across from her big mahogany desk. "I need to make a new will," I said. "A final one." She nodded, her pen ready. I laid it all out. My personal savings, what was left of Robert's pension, the furniture, the photo albums. Everything. Half of it was to go to the Paws and Wings Sanctuary Trust. The other half was to be divided equally among my grandchildren. David and Susan were not mentioned at all. As my grandson James was leaving my house that afternoon, David's car pulled into the driveway, blocking him in. I watched from the kitchen window as my son got out of his car. His face was a thundercloud. They had a tense, angry exchange right there on the gravel, their voices too low for me to hear, but their bodies stiff with fury. I was no longer just a volunteer. At the next board meeting, they officially asked me to join as a director. I sat at the long table with Sarah and the others, my opinion suddenly important. My knowledge of bookkeeping helped straighten out their donation records. My memory of the land helped plan for the future. "We could put the new veterinary clinic here," I said, pointing to a spot on the blueprints near the old barn. "It gets good morning light, and it's sheltered from the wind." They all listened. They took notes. We talked about an educational centre for school children, a place where they could learn about respecting the animals who shared our world. I was helping build something that would last. A week later, a long, rambling letter arrived from Susan. Her familiar, loopy handwriting filled 4 pages of thin, flowery stationery. It was full of blame, how I had embarrassed the family, how she and David were struggling. It was full of self-pity and excuses for her behavior. I read through it all, my tea growing cold beside me. But at the very end, tucked away after all the anger, she had written 7 small words. "I miss my mother." I read the letter one more time, then folded it neatly and put it in the back of my desk drawer. It changed nothing, not really. But it was a small, sad truth in a house that was finally learning to be happy again. I was sitting on Robert's bench with Bobby napping at my feet. The stone was cool through my slacks, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. The old oak tree spread its arms over us like a blessing. A flicker of movement caught my eye. A young doe and her fawn stepped out of the woods, their ears twitching. They moved without a sound to the edge of the creek. They weren't afraid. The doe drank, then lifted her head and looked right at me for a long moment. It wasn't a look of fear, just of quiet knowing. Then they turned and vanished back into the trees. I felt a sense of profound rightness, a peace that settled deep in my bones. The land was breathing again. The next week, Sarah from the sanctuary told me we needed to have a board meeting at my house. "It's urgent, Ellie," she said on the phone, her voice serious. I tidied up the living room, worried something was wrong. But when I opened the door, a crowd of people yelled, "Surprise!" My new chosen family was all there. Sarah and the volunteers, Mr. Henderson from next door, and my grandson, Michael, holding a lopsided cake. They threw me a 76th birthday party. They gave me a thick photo album filled with pictures of the rescued animals, each with its name written underneath. "This is your family now," Sarah whispered, giving me a hug. This time, when the tears came, they were tears of pure joy. A few days later, a small anonymous package arrived in the mail. The return address was just a post office box in a town near where Susan lived. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Inside was a simple wooden frame. It held a faded photograph of me and my children when they were small, maybe 5 and 7 years old. We were standing by the creek, covered in mud, laughing. There was no note. I knew who it was from. I looked at their smiling, innocent faces for a long time. It was a memory of a love that was real, before it was spoiled by greed. I placed it on my mantelpiece, a quiet reminder of what was lost and what I had now found. I was teaching a young volunteer, a high school girl named Chloe, how to identify bird calls. We were sitting on the porch steps, listening to the chatter in the trees. "That one's a Carolina wren," I told her. "It sounds like it's scolding you." She listened, her head tilted. "I want to be a veterinarian," she said suddenly, "because of this place, because of what you did." I looked at her bright, hopeful face. I realized my legacy wasn't just the 50 acres of land. It was this girl and the others who would come after her. It was the continuation of care. My life had become much bigger than just my own small story. The sun was setting, painting the whole sky in streaks of orange and deep purple. I was on my porch swing, the one Robert had hung for me all those years ago. Bobby's warm head rested in my lap, his soft snores a gentle rhythm. The sounds of the preserve settled in for the night. The evening calls of the birds, the rustle of unseen creatures in the woods, the distant hoot of an owl. It was my nightly symphony. A cool breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of honeysuckle. I took a deep breath. I was home, and I was at peace.